From the center of the universe, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, this is the SDM Show with your host, Rob Cairns. The SDM Show focuses on business, life, productivity, digital marketing, WordPress, and more. Sit back, relax, grab your favorite drink, and enjoy the show. Here is Rob.
Hey everybody, Rob Cairns here. I'm the founder, CEO, and chief creator of Amazing Ideas at Stunning Digital Marketing. In today's very special podcast, I sit down with Matias Ventura, the lead Gutenberg developer for Automattic, and my good friend Birgit Pauli-Hack of Automattic and Gutenberg Times, and we talk about two things. One, my move to Gutenberg and Blocks from a page builder, and the roadmap to WordPress 6.0. This was an amazing conversation. Grab a drink, put your feet up, and sit back and relax and enjoy the conversation the three of us had. Hey all, Rob Cairns here, and today I'm here with two special guests, Matias Ventura from the Gutenberg team and Birgit Pauli-Hack from Automattic. How are both of you today?
Well, hi, Rob. Thank you for having us.
It's a
Hello,
pleasure.
all good here.
Hello, Matias. And today, what I thought we'd talk about, and this is for context for listeners, it came out of some discussions that Birgit and I were having as I was converting my agency site to Gutenberg from a page builder. And many of my listeners know I've been undergoing that for months. It finished in November, December timeframe. And we talk about some lessons learned. We talk about some things we could add to Gutenberg. And then I thought we'd get Matias to give us a little bit of a preview on the roadmap to 6.0. So what I would say moving forward is I don't think there's any reason not to use Gutenberg at this point in time. I think we are at the point of time where Gutenberg is ready for the prime time. Do either of you have any thoughts on that one?
Well, I'm glad that it's working for you, and I'm very curious to hear about your experience, like doing that conversion. Because again, I think when something is ready, it's going to depend, like for different people, where they are, what they want to do, and so on. So there's still, like, I still see that we have a long road ahead. But it's wonderful to hear from, again, these very practical, concrete cases, because a lot surfaces there that is useful for the project. It's useful just to talk about it, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, and well, I think it depends on what you're looking for as well. Yeah, you're totally right, Matthias. But I think the full site editing stuff that, or all the features that are for the full site editing experience, they are just in the first version. So coming with the expectation that that is right for prime time sets you actually up for disappointment a bit if you want to really go all in what a mature product does. But if it's a simple website, simple design, it probably can help get already in production. But other things might not be yet working the way you need it to work.
No, I would agree with that. I think FSE, full site editing, still has some work to be done. We know it kind of released in 5.9 in a big way, and there's multiple people working on FSE projects. I know Brian Gardner and Nick Diego with Frost are FSE. I know Cadence is working towards full FSE. And even Cadence said in the release notes for 5.9, maybe you shouldn't quite turn on FSC right away. So I would agree, but I think in terms of blocks and things around the block ecosystem, I think they're pretty ready at this point, a lot of them. But there are some things
Yeah,
that,
and to balance that as well, because like 5.9 is a stable release, and all the tools that we have there are considered stable.
yeah.
It's just that, again, we have a lot of ideas and a lot of things that we still want to get through. And part of the advantage of, again, you don't need to, you can install 5.9 and still not switch to a theme that's making full use of these things, but you can take advantage of others, and you can sort of gradually ramp up to it if you want. But you can also just jump straight into it if that's what suits your need, your style, your site. So it's there. I think there's just like the spectrum of possibilities just continues to increase. And what I'm most interested about is like you mentioned Frost, you mentioned some other like all of these things that start to appear because like WordPress has really been built by this gigantic community of just trying things, coming up with ideas, and that's going to be to me the most exciting part now, especially in the road towards like 6.0. And then I've been saying somewhere that I feel like 6.0 is more like the catalyst of like, okay, this is the phase two of Gutenberg sort of coming around in this release. And the phase two is, again, just to remind people, is a sort of the a phase focus on everything around customization, which essentially boiled that to bringing blocks into more places of the site. And I'm really looking forward to what people try, what they come up with, and then correcting, adjusting based on that feedback.
No, I would agree with you, Matthias. It's 6.0 is going to be to me a bit of a game changer, and I think what's helped is so. Before we get into Gutenberg, let's back up to 5.9 a little bit. 5.9 was a stable release. Backing it up away from the Christmas time frame, I think, was a great
Okay.
idea, personally. As somebody who has retail clients, I don't like releases in December. I have to tell you that. I just don't. it's a bad it's a bad time. The learning team was ready with new material this time for the first time ever, and I'm kind of in tune a little bit more with the learning team these days because I co-manage a large LinkedIn group with Courtney Robertson, who's on the learning team, big on the learning team. So that kind of helps. So they're more in tune. I did 127 website upgrades after the release party from 5.8.3 to 5.9, and I didn't have one major issue. A couple
Yeah,
small ones, but nothing even to talk about, to be honest with you. So, that's a big accomplishment to the Automattic team and how you guys got this release done. So that's just wonderful, to be honest with you.
well,
Yeah,
that's
that's
excellent to
great to
hear. Yeah,
hear. Yeah.
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 Um,
And for those who are listening, we got a little bit of construction going on in, I think, in Matthias's house. So we'll just, or next door. So we'll just kind of deal with it. So it's
Yeah,
all
I'm
good.
trying to mute when I'm not talking so that it doesn't go through.
Yeah.
Hopefully it goes away soon.
Yeah. It's
yeah,
not too bad.
yeah. Going back to the release timing, I think you're right, Robert. It was a much calmer cycle to do it end of January rather than mid of December. Um, and I think the lesson was learned as well when you think about when the next the 6.0 release is scheduled for, or it's kind of targeted for like end of May, and then the 6.1 release is targeted for October, and that only three releases with the 5.9 in 2022 makes for a much calmer kind of rollout for everyone, I think, and especially for the release team that had a huge, yeah, 5.9 was huge. Yeah, there were more
Yeah.
PRs in there than ever before. It was bigger than 5.0,
Yeah.
and yeah, it kind of wears some people out. Yeah, so having more breaks in between and longer cycles definitely helps the all the contributors and all the extenders that have to adopt to the new version.
Yeah, and I'm really thankful for the whole release team, all the contributors, and so on. It's not easy to delay a release as well, but in this case, like 5.9 was really packed with a lot of changes, and really the again, in terms of size, it's like six. I don't feel like 6.0 is going to be that way, because 5.9 was introducing a lot of these things for the very first time and ensuring that all the pieces work well together, that it's stable enough, and so on. It's quite tricky. So for 6.0, we have a lot more room now to just polish and improve those things. But yeah,
And
it's
I would,
I'm glad we got through it. Yeah.
and what I would say to anybody, by the way, is if you've never experienced a release party, when 6.0 comes out, join the Slack and watch the party because it moves pretty quickly. There's a lot of testing. I did some that day with a couple of sequences. I had been testing the 5.9 betas and the release candidates all the way through, and the party just moves and it moves quickly, and that's an understatement, I would say. So if you never joined one, even if you just want to watch, join the party when 6.0 comes out. So it's an experience.
Yeah, I still remember my first one. It was 4.8, I think. Yeah, where it was really eye-opening to me how much actually goes into a release, and how many people are so interested in that to be in that channel for that period of time. Yeah. But thanks
Yeah,
for joining us all.
yeah, it was fun. So let's move on to Gutenberg, and I was going to talk a little bit about a couple of things I learned, and some of this I pulled out of a Twitter conversation, Birgit, that you and I had back in January, and I just read a couple of them off and we can kind of address them. One of the biggest things I learned in this whole experience is please, people, don't do what I did and do this on a live site. It is daunting. Set up a dev site, set up a test site. The reason I did it on a live site is to give context. I have over 200 blog posts. I publish 3 or 4 podcasts a week, give or take. So I didn't want to get into having to keep a dev site and a production site in sequence, and I didn't want to deal with that. So I said I'll do it bit by bit on a live site. In retrospect, I should have not done it that way. So don't do what I did. That's the first thing. Um, the other thing I think that's really important with Gutenberg is I believe, and I might get corrected before this podcast is out, that you need to choose the right add-ons and the right themes. And those aren't necessarily the built-in ones. I decided to go with a stack of Gutenberg-based blocks with Cadence theme, Cadence blocks, and Editor Plus by Extendify, because I think personally, and we'll get to it later, Editor Plus brings in a lot of extra functionality for text block editing that I truly think isn't in core right now. I think a couple things that will really help anybody learning Gutenberg: learn how to use reusable blocks and learn how to use block patterns. And I'll kind of stop at the first half of the list and look to Birgit and Matias for some comments on those.
Yeah, I think that that's a really interesting topic, because when we talk about Gutenberg, like some people might take that it's okay, it's just the functionality that's bundled in WordPress core. But there's so many plugins that extend and add to the experience, that is really, again, that's always been the power of WordPress, and it's been one of the main goals of Gutenberg, was to provide a basis where plugins can add blocks or tools to blocks, etc., in ways that are more consistent and just sort of work with whatever theme you have and so on. So again, Editor Plus or Canvas, there's so many libraries out there, and to be fair, like some of the features they bring are just gaps in core, that they are just not there in core. So like
Mm-hmm.
a plugin sort of adds that. Eventually, some of those may come into core, but I think if we look like really long term, there's always going to be room um, for this kind of libraries. In a way, it's like a different take on what the tools might be. Like maybe you have a library that's more geared towards designers that want control over like very specific areas of the site, things that may not ever make it into core. So that's part, to me, that's part of the beauty of having a robust system for plugins to be able to extend this, is that you can, I don't know, grab a few blocks from different collections, some different tools, some different patterns, and you can have a very curated, specific experience for the things that might work for you. At the same time, I think the directories like the pattern directory in .org are going to be very important to ensure that we're not really duplicating efforts across the community, because while I think there's a lot of room for different takes on things, it doesn't make sense to have, I don't know, 50 image blocks. That's not the point. The point is to have a really good one that is extensible and so on. So that's kind of the, but it's a very interesting topic. I'm really curious what aspects of Editor Plus you found really useful, or what sort of things you find lacking and so on.
Yeah, and there are so many different ways to actually get extensions. You could, through the extender inserter, yeah, you can have a search that goes to the block directory and picks single purpose blocks. And I think that's the most immediate interaction between the block editor and the plugin repository, when plugin authors put in single purpose blocks that then can be installed in the background, but right away added to the canvas, to the post of the block. I hear a few people, yeah, that have been on that journey for a while, that they installed quite a few of these. Then the other um, kind of plugins or these block collections. And yeah, as you mentioned, cadence blocks, there's also co-blocks, and atomic blocks, or Genesis blocks as it's called now. Um, they all have a collection of 30 to 40 blocks, but sometimes you only need one. Yeah, how can you deal with the other ones? That's kind of the idea. And there is a block manager now in the preference panel. I don't know if you ever looked at it, where you can switch off blocks so they are not shown in the inserter, so they are not have to scroll past them all the time if they are blocks that you don't need. Yeah, and then the block patterns, that's also on WordPress.org in the directory. I really love that because it shows how versatile um, combining blocks are for different layouts, of being a price list, being a header, being a hero image, being a calls to action. You get quite a few um, examples there, and the creativity can go really beyond a lot of things. And if I'm seeing that correctly, there is also, and I'm probably gonna derail it a little bit, but there's um, an idea now being worked on that themes can actually reference block patterns from the directory, so they don't have to package them with their theme. They can just point them to the directory, and it is available for a site owner right away. So that's kind of the
Yeah.
whole extension there that I
That that
mentioned.
and that's so cool. And one of the things I really like, and I sort of touched on, was a reusable box. And
Mm.
what because what you can do is set your block up, and then its styling is reusable across your site the same way it works. So one of the places I use that quite a bit is on my podcast blog pages. On my subscribe to my podcast, I actually use a reusable block that's got all the icons in it and all the podcast feeds, and I don't have to recreate it
Yeah.
on every page. I just use it as a reusable. I think reusable blocks brings power, and you can almost think of them as
Yeah.
templates, so to speak. And I think that's the way to make designer and developers' lives more productive, Matthias, is to give us tools to be able to save us time. And that's a time saver, in my opinion.
Yeah, and reusable blocks is a really cool feature in my perspective, because it's very flexible. You can,
Yeah.
and it's been really interesting to see how people use them. I've seen some sites that have thousands of reusable blocks, which is kind of wild. But which, and again, the UI doesn't really accommodate that well if you have thousands of reusable blocks. So we need to do some work there to improve these people that are really making use of them to, like, I don't know, really have like a very granular control over that thing. And I know Matt uses them for, he does like his birthday posts every year.
Yeah.
And I think at the bottom he has like a link to every previous birthday post, and that's now like a reusable block, so he doesn't need to copy that every year. And again, like a subscribe to the podcast, that's a great use of something like this, because you can sort of get this focus area where it's just, and you know that every time that you're going to, like, if you improve the design or if you make some modifications, just going to cascade to everything. So it can be a really powerful tool. I think there's I think we have a lot more work to do to improve some of the interactions. I think it's been interesting to hear some experiences from people, because reusable blog used to be a bit more like you needed to click and edit and get into like there were some barriers to editing them in the editor, and at some point that became much easier to do and so on. But now some people actually want to have like that friction point so that they don't make edits by mistake on reusable blocks. And even though we have, like, if you go to, whenever you make changes to these, like, because reusable blocks are not saved in the post itself, they are saved separately. So even if you make changes to them in a post, you always have this, when you're saving, you have this step where you can see if, like, oh, I made updates to these reusable blocks. So, and you can decide when to commit to them. But there's a lot of, like, I think, interactions that can be better.
No, I agree. And I'll get to the second half of my list of things I was talking about Gutenberg. Kind of the number 6 point was use some of the great resources out there like Gutenberg Times,
Oh,
you're welcome, learn.wordpress.org, GoDaddy's resources, and any of the big resources in the community. I always say you got to experiment and try things. So grab a dev site, throw 5.9 on, throw a theme on, play with it. And the eighth point I'm going to touch on is speed. Speed is much better with blocks, and I'll come back to that. New designers, I think they just need to learn Gutenberg instead of jumping in with a page builder. If you're brand new, I would, somebody new to the WordPress ecosystem, I would actually say learn Gutenberg, and don't do what I did and did this on a light site, and I've kind of touched on that. I want to touch back on the speed issue a little bit with Matias and Birgit. Before I went to Gutenberg, and I wish I'd kept the screenshot beforehand, but I didn't. I was running on GT metrics about an 80% speed. And I shared with Birgit a screenshot, and I can gladly send it to Matias if you want it. The after speed, I was at 99% after I cut over to Gutenberg and got away from the page builder. That to me is one
Oh,
of the
nice.
biggest
Yeah.
yeah.
reasons to go to Gutenberg is speed.
Yes, please send it to me if you have it. That's wonderful to hear.
Yeah. So I think that alone was one of the reasons I tried this project, was I wanted to see what speed actually did for me. And I'll tell you, I knocked my speed out of the park. Like, I couldn't have been happier. I ran that when I did the cutover to from the page builder theme to cadence, and I just said, "Oh my God! Like, why didn't I do this months ago?" So that alone is something people need to think about.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, that's a great. Well, speed couldn't be the one reason to do it, but it's also how do you feel kind of making your blog posts now? How has that workflow improved, and how?
Yeah, it's actually really improved, Birgit. It's a great question because I don't do typical blog posts. I haven't written a long form blog post in 2.5 years. I made a decision 2 years ago that I was going to go in all in with podcasting. So my typical blog post is a header, and then it's HTML code with a podcast, link back to Castos for the podcast, Then it's some quick show notes, which I pull out of the CAD, um, highlights, which I pull out of Castos and dump them in a text block. And then after that is an HTML block, which actually is the entire show notes. So what I do is I take my podcast, I put it into an AI that translates it into text, and then I take that text out of a Word document and I use a utility online called Word.html, and I actually dump it in there. It creates the nicely Word formatted HTML, and I dump those show notes into an HTML block, and then at the bottom I have the reusable block, and I'm done. So my workflow, honestly, for putting out podcasts is so easy now. It's actually much easier, and I've got it down to saving like lots of time, like honestly.
Hmm.
So I think
Hmm.
it's my workflow for me is really good actually. So
Yeah, it's good to hear. Yeah, awesome, awesome. So, now in that chat, we also had the question that I would like to also discuss with you and with Matthias today was, what is it? What features of the block editor that you found missing? What do you think core should work on to make it even better?
yeah, that's a really good question. I think a lot could be done around text box styling personally. And that's one reason why I had to go to Editor Plus is to do styling for headers. I think in core, there's like in the standard header block, there's not enough. That's why I'm using like Cadence Box and their advanced header styling. I think in styling options in text styling for text, there's not enough options in there personally. And I also think in the separators blocks that go in between that you can insert, I think there could be some more styling options in the separators. And then my biggest kind of fuss with the block editor is I wish it was easier to move blocks around. I'm a pretty visual guy, and I find
Hmm.
sometimes when I try and move blocks from A to B, I get frustrated in moving those blocks. And I'd love to hear Matthias's take on some of that.
Yeah, I'll start from the end. Like the moving block thing is, I think, is going to be a like there's always improvements that can be done there, and even in 5.9 I think there were a lot of like particularly focus around the list view, the panel that
Mm-hmm.
you can open on the left and you can drag and drop some blocks there, which is nice and facilitate, especially if you want to move something from like the bottom to the top and you don't want to like be going through a lot of content in the canvas itself.
Hmm.
But there's a lot of again, drag and drop is always a bit tricky. Like when do you trigger it, especially in the canvas and so on. But yeah, there's I think there's always more that can be done to continue to improve that. And it's and the nice thing is when those improvements come in, like they might take some time, but when they happen, it just benefits because all the block libraries benefit from it and so on. It's one of those things that, like, if they are done well in core, it just cascades down to all the libraries. With the other questions, I'm curious because separators to me are really interesting. I remember one of the first version of CoBlocks was they had these cool dividers that had like these shapes and so on. Um, that seems to be a kind of block that would always be or that has more room to like sort of to not be in core. Like I could imagine, I don't know, a collection of separators based on illustrations or based on calligraphy details or based on whatever you can imagine. Those things are like seems like the kind of thing that should exist in the block directory. So if you want to get like a specific flavor of something, you can do that because there's a limit to how many styling options can
Yeah.
be added and still have like a usable coherent interface. That said, I think there's some tools that are already making it in, like changing the height, the color, like maybe the radius of some of the the lines and setting like specific width, because I think right now that's the separator is one of the oldest blocks, so it hasn't really received a ton of attention with some of the newer tools. But being able to just resize them and set like a specific width, it has to be, I think the interesting thing is, it has to be connected somehow with global styles, because generally you don't want like all your separators to have different widths. You want that to be, again, a global style that you control for the whole site. So that's one of the interesting also like areas of exploration, is how can you go from these local styles that you create and then
Yeah.
make them, apply them to essentially all your, either all your paragraphs, all your headings, or a subset of them. I think there's a lot of opportunities there. But I'm curious about the text ones. Like, which ones are you like really using from Editor Plus, or which ones were you finding lacking? Because there's quite a few now around typography and color,
Mhm.
and there's probably some more that make sense. But I'm just curious about. Yeah.
I've been using more in the paragraph block. I just find it's harder to do the topography and color in that than to do it in Editor Plus. I just think for me the workflow's kind of not there yet, and that's
Okay.
why I branched out to Editor Plus. It was just easier to kind of go through its workflow than the core workflow, Matias. At the time I did this.
Yeah.
Now some of that's changed with the release of 5.9, and the bulk of this was all done before 5.9. So
Yeah.
but that was
Yeah.
something that I found when I was working through it. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say give it a try, because one of the challenges with the paragraph block is that it needs to work for, like, there's a subset of users that really only care about writing, and
Yeah.
they don't want to see any like styling option on paragraphs because it's kind of overwhelming. So they just want to be able to, like, again, write and maybe pick like a size from presets and so on. So there's a lot of work that went into controlling what tools paragraphs show by default. And the new tools panel, they have a lot of, well, there are a lot of settings. Some of them are a bit hidden initially. Like, you need to like open the ellipsis menu for the specific tools and enable like letter spacing or stuff like that. Like different styles, font sizes. There's a lot of like granularity there, but it's not necessarily visible immediately. It depends also on how like, it's something that you can control through theme.json. This is more if you're setting up a site for others and you don't want to expose certain options, so you can control that from there.
Yeah.
But I think it's quite powerful now, and I'm curious about bringing some more like writing tools. We've had this request to add like text justification for a long time. And one of the challenges is that you generally, like, outside of all the concerns and issues with text justification on the web and how hyphenation works and so on, one of the challenges is that you don't want to do that on a per paragraph basis. You want to do that globally. So there's a lot of like these writing tools that now have a place in global styles and can be explored there more. um, so it's I think there's quite a few things to look forward to. But I'm curious, if you give it a try again, like what things you find, or what sort of frictions, and again, if you don't find certain tools, or if you find some others lacking, that would be great to know.
No, I'd be glad to give it a try. You sort of touched on theme.json, and I think I'm going to go there. I wasn't planning to. There's been all kinds of discussion for global styles, especially around colors, especially around topography, that I think what we're going to start to see is a whole pile of WordPress plugins crop up to manage the theme.json file. So people don't have to actually go into the file and make those changes. They can do it through a plugin which will update theme.json. Do you have any thoughts on that, or if there's any plan to include some of that functionality in core?
Yeah, absolutely. In 5.9, one of the big features was also because theme.json was introduced in 5.8, and
Yeah.
5.9 introduced global styles, which is some parts of what you mentioned. Is an interface for being able to modify some aspects of theme.json. Not everything that's there, but some of the parts. There's one aspect of global styles that's in a very initial state. Like if you open the sidebar and you go to the blocks section beneath, the idea is that that would allow you to control blocks in a global way, and that's modifying the theme.json controls. I don't think everything that you can modify in theme.json is going to be in global styles, but I think like a fair amount of things do make sense there as the UI progress and develops. But until that happens, it's definitely it's definitely viable and wonderful to see the community like creating tools for interacting with it in different ways. And also I'm very interested in how plugins are going to do that, like the keeping an eye on stuff like WooCommerce or
Yeah.
Sensei for learning. Like how do you, or even like other stuff that is meant to work on the front end, even stuff like ads. Like one of the issues with ads for a long time was that it was hard to like integrate with a specific color scheme of a theme and so on. Now theme.json provides you like these primitives, and any plugin anywhere can read these primitives and use them to like say, oh, the user wants these colors used in this way, or they can like base it on these other blocks and so on. So that's also what I'm interested in seeing how that goes, because you can have tools that interact with theme.json, but then also plugins that read from it, and then also even applying this to the directories, because you could imagine like browsing the pattern directory in .org, but using your theme JSON, so you can see the patterns with your site colors, with your like so your typography options and so on. So it's sort of like you get your own custom pattern directory by just applying those theme JSON directives.
Yeah, and I think what I saw also on the roadmap is some tools that you can actually export some of that, especially your templates and your template parts. I'm not sure that you are able to export the user settings yet, but there is some. There, I saw that in the roadmap that that is actually coming in terms of gradual adoption and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's another thing that, because it's not just exporting your theme JSON, but also switching themes and preserving your theme JSON, or combining it with different parts, or maybe like you keep a portion of your theme JSON but incorporate something from another theme and so on. Like one cool feature that is not in 5.9, it's in the Gutenberg plugin now, is the style variations thing, where you can essentially swap on the fly different theme JSONs on the global styles UI. Right now, that works with like a theme can bundle different theme JSONs to modify, like again, basic settings or essentially whatever they want. But it's like this is not. There's no reason why this needs to be restricted to the theme. Like I could see again, the theme directory could, you could be browsing the theme directory and say I want to take the styles from the theme but not the layouts. I only want to get the theme JSON, and that should be possible now because it's everything is inherently compatible. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
I think it's gotten to the point where I don't want to code anymore, Matthias. I've got a coding background in business. I don't want to code. I admit that, and people just laugh at me and say, "But you're good at it." And I say, "No, I just don't. I'm kind of in that whole no code variety, if you know what I mean." And you're laughing, and it's true. And I think it's gotten to the point where with Team JSON, you don't need to be a coder to update that file anymore. It's pretty intuitive, and then the plugins and the ecosystem being built around it is just going to make it even easier. I wanted to move to one other topic, and I think Birgit's talked about it in Gutenberg Times. I've certainly talked about it in several places. Is the ability to lock blocks down, and I think there's all kinds of discussion in the community, especially for people who build sites for others, and saying we love the ability to kind of lock blocks down. Is any of that coming into court?
Um,
Y-
Go ahead,
Go
Matthias.
ahead.
Yeah, after I heard that there was a quite a few people that wanted to are afraid that users are going to destroy designs. That's one um, faction of that. The other one is that companies have um, a design system already, and they have standards on publishing, so they also wanted to lock down the block editor. And there are multiple ways to do this that are already part of WordPress. And one is a block template locking, where you can say, oh, okay, I have a template of block that's in code. Um, that so the series, an image block, a header block, and a paragraph block, you can change the content, but you cannot remove it. You can switch out the image, but you can't remove it. So it's and you can't change the um, design of it. So these kind of locking is now available. It's also for column blocks and group blocks. And there was a dev node, a developer node out there, how you can do this. Then there is also with the theme JSON, and I put a blog post up on the Gutenberg Times where how to actually do switch off background colors, switch off custom colors, switch off custom duotones or gradients, or the default palette. Because if you don't switch it off, the block editor comes with a core color palette, and is yeah, you can switch that off. You can yeah, and then also border controls you can switch off. Typography, there's a 6 or 7 different attributes that you can all set to false, so there is no drop cap, then there is no control for letter spacing or font weight, or line heights, or any other um, yeah, custom font size, or even the spacing. Yeah, the one that trips up a few theme designers also was that the block gap, that was a feature added to it, that changes a little bit the design, so you can switch it off in the theme JSON. And then there is actually on the core block, Anne McCarthy published a post called Curated Experiences with Locking APIs and Theme JSON, where you also can read it all in one place. So there are some great um, tools in place that you already can use to lock things down, and to switch off options. Matthias, are there any additional feature settings that you can see that will come to 6.0 for that?
Yeah, I think to me, well, it's interesting that because this is a part that was heavily underemphasized, perhaps for not just for 5.9. Some of these tools were in 5.8 and so on, but it's just the volume of changes added and geared towards, again, like the initial things we were discussing, like more tools for typography, more tools for all of these things. So it's natural that the emphasis and the communication is all about like, oh, you can modify and change and customize, because that's the heart of the what we're trying to build. But it was also many of these other features that are really powerful, and I think we didn't have them before in WordPress. They also deserve attention, and it's like it's precisely what you described. Like you can, like the locking of blocks, it works down to every single block. You can choose which blocks get locked for the user and which don't, and so on. And there's a lot of granularity there. The same with theme JSON. I think the next steps there are going to be, because right now you need to dive into the sort of the HTML code of the block to add the attribute. It's going to be essentially to expose that in the UI. The same that happened with theme JSON. The initial rollout was, oh, you just modify this JSON file. Now there is a UI on top of it. The same is going to happen to these locking mechanisms, so that you can, and sometimes it can be as simple as self-serve. Maybe you have your, I don't know, you're subscribed to podcast thing and you don't want to touch it. You want to just leave it locked. You can choose as a user, I want to lock this so I don't modify it by mistake. But that could also be done by a site administrator and so on. It can be paired with permissions and so on. So there's a lot of, and it's good to, I think what we're finding is that we need a lot more communication and examples and again, posts like what Anne did, what you're doing in Gutenberg Times and so on, like just to amplify and showcase all of these experiences and see also from the community, like people having cool use cases for these tools. Because it's similar to reusable blocks, where again the tools and functionality is there, but how it gets used, like the creative uses of these tools, is really what I think what makes them shine. And that comes from regular people, sites maintainers, designers and so on, playing with it. um, it doesn't have to be, I think it's important to, like, there are many things that you can see the Gutenberg tools from an end user perspective and someone that just wants to be able to customize and express themselves. You can see it from a theme designer perspective, which is also really cool, like the ability to um, sort of essentially create a theme from scratch just using the editor. I think that's going to open up the doors for many designers to be able to contribute and share their work to the entire world. And then there's also the site maintainers or the people that are running larger sites or agencies or brands that need this control. And all of these are valid use cases, and we're building for all of them. Like, we're not, sometimes a specific use case might get a bit more attention but essentially WordPress is just building for all of these use cases.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just wanted to move on a little bit to the roadmap. Now, 5.9's come out. I've heard there's rumblings there'll be a 5.9.1 release to clean up some things. Is that still on the roadmap, Matthias, or is that kind of not going to
Yeah,
happen?
there's a few. Yeah, there's a few bugs and polish that would be good to release in a point one.
Hmm.
There might be more again if like more things are uncovered before like 6.0 is like a few months away, but that doesn't mean like if there's other stuff we might have other minor releases, like always. But yeah.
Yeah,
And
JB Audras is the release lead for 5.9 point one, and he just put up a post on the Make Core blog that the release candidate for 5.9.1 is scheduled for February 17th.
okay.
Um, and then the final release is aimed for February 22nd. And it has quite a few different things that are going to be changing, that are in that release. Um, so um, yeah, there are
The-
21 track tickets that are already been fixed, and then there are quite a few, like up to 50 plus pull requests that are in the projects. They might not make it to the release, but they are already working on pulling that in for the release candidate tomorrow. Yeah.
And I want to talk about the track tickets for a sec. Folks, if you've got a ticket, please don't just get out on the Twitter or onto Slack and grumble about it. Go open a proper ticket through the tracking system. If you don't know how, I'm sure Birgit would be glad to help you. I'm going to put you on the spot.
Absolutely. Yes.
And I know
Yeah.
Courtney Robertson over at GoDaddy Developer Advocate. Courtney said if you don't know how, reach out to her. I know Brian Gardner in a talk, and Nick Diego said last week, if you don't know how to do it, reach out to them. They're going to hate me at the end of this podcast, but that's okay because they've all been very public about it. We understand your frustrations, but do it the right way so we don't lose track of these tickets. Because I've seen posts where people are jumping on Twitter and grumbling, and then they think that's going to get a ticket open and a resolve. Don't do it that way. Open the ticket. Help Matias and his team. Help the 5.9.1 release team. Let's get in this together, right? And do it right.
Yeah. Thank you for that shout out.
Yeah, you're
I
welcome.
definitely want to reiterate,
It's
yeah,
a
if there's any
frustration of mine, like the
if
no
there's
bully.
anything that
Matthias,
you don't
let's
know
talk
if
about
it's
the roadmap to
already
6.0.
already
What big
known or
changes
something like
from
that, yeah,
5.9 are
just reach
going
out to
to
me
go in?
either on the WP Slack or on the Twitter DMs. I'd be happy to follow through on that.
Thank you, Birgit. We really appreciate you doing that. Let's reach out and talk about the roadmap to 6.0 for a minute, Matthias. What do you see going into 6.0 in a big way that's not in 5.9 besides some enhanced FSE functionality?
There's quite a few things that are actually on the plan. The way it's divided, it's well, there's a bunch of improvements to the new site editor and interactions that happen there, like opening up templates. Right now, you can create templates for like archives, single pages, and so on, but there's no reason why you couldn't open a new template for a specific category. Like you have your podcast category and you want to make changes to just the template for that category, you should be able to do that because WordPress supports that. So there's a lot of like just opening up more of these doors. A lot of them are have been kept closed just because to do things gradually, but there's no reason why they cannot be open. And I think that's really where a lot of these things would start to thrive more because again, you can go and say, oh, for my podcast I want to have a specific header for all the posts that are published under this category, and you should be able to do all of
Yeah.
those combinations. Then there's also some work to be done on patterns, particularly better connections with the pattern directory, being able to explore more patterns, having patterns that are specific for headers or specific for footers or different areas of the site, essentially being able to build with patterns more. So there's some work going on there. The styles variations that we already talked about is also part of continuing to improve the global styles and so on system. Um, and we have a lot of work to be done on design tools, particularly around like responsive typography, responsive containers, things that just work better on mobile and so on. um, Plus also like there's some like a long list of more minor but very impactful things, like being able to use feature images on a cover block. That's one that's been requested a lot. And a long list of the, again, different tools that not all the blogs have the same sort of typography and dimensions and so too, so consolidating some of those tools a bit. And then allowing more direct manipulation as well if you want to change heights or sizes of more blocks, like just making sure that all the tools are available a bit everywhere. And one I also missed to mention is the like the fonts API. That's also going to be pretty big in that it's going to allow a sort of like a central mechanism for themes for anyone to register font assets and for you to be able to manage them eventually and keep them if you switch themes and integrate them with global styles and so on. So there's quite a few coming up, and I'm sure I left a bunch of other things.
Well, I'm definitely excited about the featured image and cover blocks and media and text for the query block or the post templates. But I found one thing that is something that has been come up quite often was to have inline tokens. What I mean by that
Yes.
is um,
Yeah.
having variables that are within the flow text on a paragraph, like the current date or the current author or something like that, that you can define and then reuse, like merge tags, pretty much. In rich text blocks, that would I see it on the list. I don't know how high that is on the priority, but I would really um, eliminate quite a few shortcodes that are still out there
Yeah.
because it doesn't allow it for now.
Yeah, it's been something on the repository like track for quite a while, like before 5.0 even. It's just that now that you have more places where you want and more places where you want to add dynamic content, for example, maybe in your footer you want to say I don't know, at the current year, for example, like this mode.
Hmm.
And not all of these things need to be blocks, like standalone blocks. Like you don't need like a current year block and so on, because you might want to like add it in a paragraph or in a heading, or it depends. So some of those are what they are essentially like inline blocks in a way,
Hmm.
inline tokens that can be inserted. So there's some exploratory work to figure out how to do them most effectively, and there needs to be some design work on how to expose them.
Hmm.
And I think that can take, yeah, like you said, it can absorb a lot of like, because inline shortcodes were essentially doing that. It's just lacking like a UI to manage them. There was that project Shortcake for a
Hmm.
while that was aiming to do that. This is like a subset of those problems. It's more focused on like rich text capabilities that you can just insert this dynamic text essentially. It's not meant to be for everything. Initially it's meant to be like um, yeah, like a convenience for adding some of these things. And it's not it's sort of like in the 6.0 Roma, but it's not clear if it's going to be
Hmm.
ready by then.
Yeah, totally.
Does
Yeah,
part
and
of the
yeah,
does part of the
go
issue,
ahead.
Matthias, with this become it's not, and I hate to use this term, a sexy project, so to speak. Like we've had this issue, I know, with the media library for years, where, and I know it's kind of out of realm of what we're talking about, but nobody's ever addressed the issues, the constant issues in the media library because it's not that fun project to work on. Does this one fall into that same realm, or is it just a case of not getting to it?
No, I would say that there are some challenges on this project to do it right.
Yeah.
That if like the UI needs to be really well thought out, because otherwise it can create like another layer of confusion for people. Like, oh, I'm
Hmm.
dealing with a block or I'm dealing with this inline thing, and it can get like it's one of those things that it might be easy to add, but then very very difficult to remove if it doesn't. So it needs to. I feel like it needs some testing, some focus, prototyping, some a lot of user testing to figure out what the right balance is. So it's more around that, I think,
Yeah.
rather than
Okay.
not being like a useful feature. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the other part on the preliminary roadmap that I find very intriguing was when we talked about it on the Gutenberg Changelog podcast was the section that you headlined with gradual adoption on the post,
Yeah.
having a way to use part of the FSE template architecture also in normal themes that you don't have to make a block theme to actually use some of
Yeah.
the features where you can open up a theme to have the user just change the header or a sidebar and have these template parts be exposed as well for yeah, not only block themes but also classic themes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is, in a way, it's sort of like complementary to the reusable blocks that we discussed, but just applied to your templates essentially. So you can have these different areas on a classic theme, and a classic theme doesn't need to update the entire theme to be blocks. They can just drop a PHP tag and say, "Oh, here, like I want to use a like a block area for something," and then the user would get the nice UI with a focus editor just for that area where they can add whatever blocks they need to. So it's essentially, it's kind of like reusable blocks, but for specific dedicated areas. And that can allow, again, themes to start absorbing them. Maybe you have, I don't know, a page where you're doing campaigns and you want to dedicate like a special area and just say, okay, manage this with blocks, but not the whole page. Like there's a lot of like granularity there that I think can be useful. And it's not just like gradual adoption can also sometimes mislead people to thinking like, oh, this is like a stepping stone towards everything being blocks. But that's not the case. Like you might have cases where you don't need everything to be blocks. Like uh, it's not something that needs to be forced. It's just one more tool that is there for themes to use that is really connected with a nice UI and a nice experience. And again, it supports all the third-party blocks. It supports, if you have Editor Plus, you get access to all these tools from Editor Plus in this specific area. So it just compounds the benefits of the whole ecosystem. I think another one related to the sort of the gradual adoption is opening up like more of the theme JSON stuff for all themes. I think that's worth exploring. And if it doesn't happen in core immediately, I could also see like plugins doing like again integrations with a customizer, for example, for theme JSON. All of that is very viable to do.
Yeah, there's some great things coming to it, and I feel that it needs to be made clear that the block theme is not something that is going to be the only thing that's happened in the future on WordPress. I think classic themes or PHP themes have a long um, life to be with WordPress, because but the block theme development actually opens up those themes to have certain things that they weren't able to do before, like having sections where you have an interface that's block based and that's standardized to give users gradual freedom on certain things, but still have all the features that are in a PHP theme
Yeah.
and that that are in a startup theme and all that. It opens up the current theme so much more to so much more um, features that it's actually an enrichment of the current theme. Um, Area or environment, rather than narrowing it down all to block themes.
Yeah, and I personally like that flexibility, Birgit, that you
Hmm.
can you're not narrowed down like a traditional classic theme. So I think for a lot of people that's a move in the right direction. Really is. So I wanted to thank both of you for jumping on. Was there anything you wanted to add? We'll start with Birgit at the end.
Well, I have two things that I brought with me today,
Sure.
and one is that there is a new call for testing out, speaking about the media library for
Yep.
the FSE, the full site editing outreach program. And the testing call is now also available in Italian and Japanese. So if you go to the Make Core Block test, it's right there, FSE, all things media, and it is on some instructions and some ideas on how to also explore how the WordPress photo directory could be part of the media library and how that would work. And the second part is that we started earlier this month a series of events called the Gutenberg Developer Hours on the social learning space on Meetup, and that next one is happening on February 22nd at 11 Eastern, 1600 UTC, where developers bring their questions, their ideas, their bugs, and have an expert panel and have them answer that, discuss it, or kind of get these things out of the way. The expert panel for February 22nd would be Joni Halabi, George Mamadishvili, and Daisy Olson. So, and we cover everything from theme development, plugin development, agency development. So head out to the meetup.com and then look for the WordPress social learning spaces there.
Thank you, Birgit, and get involved in that. It's a great opportunity and great people to learn from. Matthias, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, only to encourage people to keep sharing feedback, like both the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's all super useful. We have all these different channels that you've already mentioned, and again, we're always on the look for this kind of feedback to just help improve WordPress. So yeah, just mainly that, and then thank you very much for this opportunity and for inviting us to talk about this.
Oh, such a pleasure. And I kind of would like to add, get involved in the community. And my kind of theme for this year is let's worry about this great community that we have and keep helping each other. And I don't care if it's getting involved in helping somebody on Twitter, giving back. And we all know in the WordPress community about Five for the Future, giving back that way, getting involved in the group we have on LinkedIn, getting involved somewhere and contribute. Don't just be I don't like this. Well, if you don't like something, why don't you like it? And let's help the feedback, because the odds are if you're thinking it, somebody else is thinking it. So let's bring this community and make it tighter than ever before. Birgit, if somebody wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way?
Well, Twitter, my handle is BPH. These are my initials. My DMs are direct messages are open, or definitely I always hang out on the WP, the WordPress Make Slack. Also, yeah, in the various channels, be it in Core Editor, Docs, or just send me a direct message. And I want to also iterate, thank you, Robert, for all the work that you do with the podcasts. I know you had multiple times talked about the blog editor and your experience, and you have great interviews with practitioners, plugin developers. And so this is also a great contribution to the community. Thank you so much for that.
Oh,
And
thank
thank
you
you for
for
inviting us.
and thank you for the kind words. And Matias, if somebody really wants to reach out to you, is there a channel, Slack, or how's the best way?
So my website is matiasventura.com. I have a contact form there. My Twitter handle is Matias_Ventura. And I'm also on Matias Ventura on the .org Slack channels. And you can reach out anywhere to me.
And thank you to both of you for joining me. It's been a wonderful conversation, a good look back, a good look forward, and I hope we can have them again sometime. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks again.
Thanks so much
Likewise.
for
Thank you
having
very
us.
much.
Bye bye.
Bye. A very special thank you to Matias and Birgit for joining me on today's podcast. I hope you really enjoyed the insights the three of us shared with you today.
Thank you for listening to this edition of the SDM Show. The SDM Show is brought to you by Rob Cairns and Stunning Digital Marketing. For more information about Rob Cairns and Stunning Digital Marketing, go to stunningdigitalmarketing.info. From here, you can connect to us on social media, go to our website, and even go to the podcast to subscribe. This podcast is dedicated to my late father, Bruce Cairns. Dad, I miss you very much. Keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, make your business succeed.